Hi, thank you for your contribution in making this program better, ranging from your comments, your gratitude for Professor Nikolai Petrovsky and his time, and every single, even the minutest of details you picked in making this program better. So, our today's topic is based on risks of emerging viral agents and microbial agents in general, how well prepared we are as an individual, meaning what our immunity means to us and how we can boost it. What is the gain of function research and what does it have to do with our concerns with public health? And in part two of our discussion that we posted next Sunday, we will be discussing the preparedness and the modern public health approach in dealing with upcoming and emerging pandemics compared to what the history has been like. So stay tuned. Hello and good evening, Professor Emeritus Nikolai Petrovsky. Tell us what this new title means to you.
For those who are not familiar with the title, when you retire, or in my case, transition, um, and have previously been a professor, then you can receive a title of emeritus professor, which is to acknowledge your long service in the academic setting. But in my case, as I say, it doesn't mean I've retired from vaccine development. It just means I've retired from actively teaching in the university.
In last program, I announced that preparation for this topic took me 26 years. What I meant by that was that in 1999, I first came across something of an outbreak. Probably it was in newspaper about West Nile virus outbreak, probably in New York City. From then on, we now can now trace a chain of different what I call micro outbreaks. In 2003, there was SARS-1. Then in 2007, we've had uh, H1N1, if I'm not wrong. Um, Fast forward further, back in 2013-14, we've had um, uh, an agent causing swine flu and an Ebola outbreak. In between, we had in UK and East Asia, Southeast Asia, outbreaks of foot and mouth disease, then Zika virus, until we came across COVID-19 that completely upended the lifestyle for 2 to 3 years. But the COVID-19 had not finished when the Mpox started being discussed as a new agent of concern. So there has been a chronology um, of these small outbreaks, one after the other. And in between, we've had several outbreaks of microbial agents as well, like measles and mumps, diarrhea. So, take us through this frequency that seems to be increasing every second or third year. We are coming across one outbreak or the other, in particular, these viral outbreaks.
So I think the important thing to realize is this actually is nothing new. Um, Viruses have been crossing over from animals to humans for thousands of years. What is really changed, I guess, is the public awareness, because of the media are much more themselves aware of the outbreaks and their potential significance, and so they're communicating this to the public. So it's not that these episodes are necessarily any more frequent than they ever used to be. I think if you went and talked to people from the Center of Disease Control in the United States who monitor these outbreaks and have been doing this, for the last 50 years or more, they will tell you that these events have been happening every few years, all the way back. But it's really now the fact that the media and the public are much more aware of these events than they used to be. So, so I think that's one thing, is just awareness. Now, coming back to the question, well, are they, yes, they have been happening, for time immemorial, are they accelerating? In other words, are they becoming more frequent? Are these crossover events? The answer is yes, probably, and the major reason for that is that as the number of humans on the planet expands, and as humans expand into areas that are previously been dominated by wild animals, it's inevitable that that interaction will increase the likelihood of a virus which has been happily stable in a wild animal population, whether it's in bats, or many other deer, you name it. Every animal species on the planet has its own viruses. Some of those viruses, when they're given the opportunity, can cross over to humans. But first, you have to have an interaction between the wild animal or the vector, say the mosquito or the tick, that then takes that infection and infects a human. So as humans, push further and further into jungles and change the habitat and destroy the habitat of these wild animals, then the probability of a crossover event that results in an outbreak is increased. So I think yes. So I think it's most of it is just perception that these things are happening very often, but there probably is also a slightly increased rate of events, just because the number of humans on the planet, is going up continually.
So, in your opinion, can there be a balance between human beings and all other species coexisting on Earth with this increasing pressures? I think of land use, where we end up encroaching and ingressing further into the habitats that have historically and traditionally been reserved or have remained predominated by these other species.
So I think, again, there's a whole range of factors we could discuss that are impacting on the likelihood of viruses crossing over from wild animals to humans. And increasing numbers of humans and habitat are only just one of them. There's also climate change, movement of mosquitoes into new jurisdictions, where mosquitoes are able to transmit disease. Again, a whole range of factors.
Another discussion that comes to mind in the context of these emerging viruses that pose risk of infectious diseases is the gain of function research. The gain of function, what I understand, uh, has become a public health concern, has been a public health concern, but until you don't know the problem, it's not possible to find a solution for it, particularly in scenarios such as viruses, which pose such grave risks. There are some outstanding drug development centers and um, clinical research centers, and some fantastic uh, geneticists and other related infectious disease experts who would need to find out more about these viruses before strategy against them could be planned or drugs against them could be developed. So, when the gain of function research becomes a public health concern, your thoughts?
I think that gain of function research in its entirety is unavoidable, because in essence, by studying a virus, there are situations in which you may give that virus additional capabilities, not necessarily deliberately. Just by culturing a virus, you're changing the genome of the virus, and some of those changes may make the virus better adapted to a different environment. So, yes, I think you're right. You can't do viral research with having an element of gain of function. I think where people push back is where you deliberately um, almost weaponize a virus. And of course there's a crossover between gain of function and the old biological weapons programs, run by the United States and Russia. And I think that's where people start to get concerned about gain of function research, where it's not research just into viruses, but it's into research to make viruses highly lethal for humans, specifically targeting humans. And of course, I think we all agree, all scientists would agree, no, that shouldn't be allowed. You shouldn't be allowed to weaponize viruses or any other pathogen. But, looking at gain of function as being much broader than that, being just doing research on viruses that may give viruses different characteristics, which may be beneficial to that virus, is very different. And it needs to be allowed because, as you say, if we don't research viruses, how can we find answers to viral threats? And so I think it's a delicate balance. But yes, we do need gain of function research, but not at the level where people are trying to weaponize a virus.
Moving on, Dr. Petrowski, can immunity be quantified? Because this entire discussion on the viruses and the risks, the biological risks they pose to individual and the communities, uh, it has it has an entire context in the level of immunity that we have.
If we're talking about quantifying immunity to a novel virus, then yes, if we know the virus we want, that we want to study. But if we're talking about a theoretical virus, currently there's no easy way to predict if humans are going to be immune or not. We're starting to develop AI based tools that may be able to predict such behaviours going forward. So we're going in that direction, but I don't think currently we have that capability to predict what might happen with a completely novel virus if it crosses to the human population.
The reason I brought up this question of immunity, and you referred to it as quantifying the immunity, was the visual of our supermarkets and even over the counter pharmacies being flooded with different supplements, jars, syrups, and products, claiming to boost immunity. And this in itself is an entire industry.
Well, I mean, we can do population studies. For instance, if we look at vitamin supplements, vitamin D, there's very good epidemiological evidence that in populations that are vitamin D deficient, they'll have a higher rate of viral infections. And so giving vitamin D supplements to make sure everyone has enough vitamin D can be shown to reduce their risk of getting coughs and colds and other viral infections. Would it necessarily stop someone dying from, say, SARS-CoV-2 or another pandemic virus? That's another question. Again, the effects of these supplements is relatively modest, so it might change the severity of disease, but in terms of, does it give you a guarantee of protection against a lethal virus, say Ebola at the extreme? I'd be saying no. I mean, take all the vitamin D supplements in the world. If you get exposed to Ebola, I suspect there's a high likelihood you'll still die unless you get a specific treatment, whether it's a vaccine or, say, a monoclonal treatment that blocks the virus.
So the discussion on the risk or the degree of risk that a virus or viral agent, or for that matter any microbial agent, pose to an individual given the immunity level, this entire discussion is also incomplete without talking about the environment in which this interaction is going on, and uh, part of our discussion, very important part of the discussion, is how to prepare those communities and those environments better to mitigate these risks and dampen down this interaction between a microbial hazardous microbial agent and somebody at risk of disease, an individual at risk of disease.
So I think we need to separate what we can do at the public health level or the community level to reduce risk versus how do we reduce risk for a single individual in terms of exposure to a serious virus, whether it's influenza or SARS-CoV-2 or Ebola. So certainly at the community level, there's a lot more that could be done about making sure that we minimize risk factors. So we know, for instance, that obesity is a high risk factor for severe COVID-19. There's very, very clear evidence of that. So if we're preparing for a pandemic, and I think this goes back to my background as an endocrinologist and diabetologist, and I think yours as a public health expert, that if we want to prepare for a pandemic that may happen in the future, and we want to reduce its impact, we need to reduce the level of obesity in the community. And that may pay enormous dividends. And people wouldn't think about that as an antiviral strategy. But we've now seen this with the swine flu pandemic in 2009. We've seen it with SARS-CoV-2, this relationship between obesity and higher risk of severe disease. So that's just one example at the community level. Obviously, making sure no one is vitamin D deficient at the community level could have, again, a massive impact on overall community risk of severe disease in a pandemic. Now, as I say, at the individual level, vitamin D supplementation probably has minimal or very little effect. But at the community level, because you have people with widely varying vitamin D levels, and some will be very deficient and therefore at high risk of a viral infection, that will have a big impact. So that's why I say it's very important for people to understand that something that has a impact at the community level may not in itself be the thing that will save you against a pandemic virus, but it will reduce the overall impact of the virus on the community if there is an outbreak.
I requested Dr. Petrosky to stop here, take a pause until we come back to wrap up this theme next Sunday. Stay tuned.